how can we start?
Yeah, how can we start? I don't know.
So
Woohoo!
I have a personal story with this piece. I mean, not really long story, but I saw it in 2005, and not until now. And so I was surprised when I heard it's going to be shown here, and then I read the extended. So I mean, now I can tell a little bit more, but I was wondering what was extended for you?
I mean, so indeed it was a piece that I first made in 2005, just called To Come, and it was with 5 dancers. I was one of them at the time. And the last part was not naked, but dressed, but still similar in the choreographic material. And it was a piece that at the time I was happy about, and I wanted to redo it, but it was never possible because the original cast couldn't do it. So it was left behind for some 5-6 years. And then I actually started working on sexuality again, but 10 years later, so in 2014, I was again busy with questions around the relationship between sexuality and the public sphere. And I made 4 works, and this is one of them, that had to do with thinking about where we are today in relation to questions around sexuality and its relation to the public sphere. And I felt that some of the things I was addressing in 2005 were somehow not exhausted. And I did a project with a group of students, a very large group of students, and we tried to work on the blue part in an extended version, and that was kind of where the idea to do a new version came from. And meanwhile, I had also been doing the Lindy Hop naked in another piece, and I thought we should try it. So this version kind of came out of a longer process of doing materials that actually belong to this first version. And I think it's quite different. Like, this version is actually quite different, of course, because of the nudity, but also because of the extended number of dancers. That also, for me, makes it more like a piece that speaks about societal constructions more than a smaller group that you could also maybe in 2005 read as an exception to society. So, yeah, I think that would be the short answer.
Yeah, I was trying to think when I was watching today, except for the number of people and the fact that they were also dressed when they were doing the thing. So they were all dressed for dancing, right? They would get off the blue thing and then put on dancing clothes and then do the part with the headphones.
Yeah.
And then dance. And so except for the fact that there's more, and there's more possibility for composition, because it now became really about composition a lot. I don't know if that's just because when you have so many people, you can really appreciate how you work with choreographical tools.
I think that when we started working on this version, I became very interested also in the sculptural, because of course the more people you are, the more stillness there also is in this kind of composition. And we started, I mean, we've been looking a lot at sexual imagery. How does sexual imagery operate? How could we potentially make it operate in a different way? And for me, the idea of slowing down time and slowing down also energy curves, because in theater we also have certain kinds of rhythms that could in a way be considered orgasmic. And with this piece we tried to in a way create more like flat planes, so you have 30 minutes, which is pretty low level information. And then there's a choir, which is an orgasm choir, but that is repeating over and over again, so that there is never an end to it, and usually the orgasm is the end of a certain sequence. And the dance usually is very often used as a little energetic number to, animate, and here we also kind of extend this form of dancing to a very long sequence that then, to me, also exposes something about exhaustion and energy and overcoming exhaustion and using energy to kind of as a form of joyful resistance to a kind of energy depletion or something like this. So, yeah, so in terms of composition, it's also really, in a way, there's a micro composition in each part, and then there's also a more like a larger curve, which actually is composed as like 3 different planes, and we kind of jump from one to the other. And there's also an idea around how the foreground and the background is shifting. So, like in 2005, I was looking a lot at Blue Key cinema. And in Blue Key cinema, they, shoot dangerous scenes. For instance, someone hanging off a cliff. They shoot it in front of a blue screen, and then afterwards they kind of replace the background with another image. And so the idea of the blue color and this switching from the body to the background has to do with somehow trying to create like a surface where you can project things onto. Yeah, so there's a lot of compositional choices that are actually also related to more conceptual ideas about what the piece is or how it works.
I would like to ask a silly question. Like when you were making the images in the blue suits, can you simply talk a little bit about what kind of images were you looking at? What were like the references? Or
we looked at the engravings of Makid Saad, which are kind of orgy engravings. But for me, what was interesting in those images is that as they are engravings, they are also kind of imaginations. So for instance, the ass pile that we do at a certain point, we saw it on these images, and I was like, is it even possible to stack so many people on top of each other? And I kind of thought no, and then we tried it, and actually yes. So it's it had to do with let's say sexual imaginary. So what can we imagine as being possible, and then how can we actualize those kind of structures that are different from, let's say, having sex in a couple in a closed-off, intimate space. So we looked at that, and then we also, there's the Chapman brothers who make really sculptures that look a bit like melted together bodies. They also look like children with sneakers, very strange sculptures, quite disturbing. So that was also a reference. There's another sculpture which is by Charles Ray, which is basically 8 copies of himself made in wax figures and doing an orgy. So there was a question of how to, in a way, take away the individual bodies by putting on these suits and seeing how it, in a way, changes intimate behavior. And also how it's possible for the dancers to do these things, which obviously it's intimate to do also. So it's not you put on the suit and it's not. It's still intimate, but it's working through a kind of anonymity where one body is somehow replaceable with another, or where you can also shift your sexual orientation as you somehow like. And that can be a quite liberating space also to be in. So,
is it also why there are no penises in the blue, where like kind of, I mean, you can tell, I mean, you can still tell the breasts, but there is no So it like kind of tries to
I mean,
melt.
they're still there.
They're like, but you know, they're not.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think the idea with the suits were that both men and women would, in a way, look the same and not be bound to a kind of biological sex, but to say that it's actually something we can perform, and that anyone can be the one on top or in the bottom or penetrating or being penetrated. So it's like it's a game where you decide yourself which role you want to play, and that's also a political statement on some level, that these, let's say, power structures are not fixed and we can actually change them if we pay attention to them. So yeah, the work also has to do with that, producing a kind of physical practice that allows the bodies to, in a way, have a certain fluidity with gender orientations.
We don't have so much time, and I still have a few questions, but maybe there's many people here. Maybe someone else also have a question about, because I also wanted to ask you about other pieces in this Red series, or how is this called?
The red pieces.
Red pieces, sorry. So there is this family of red pieces, which this one is one of them. Mm-hmm. And also something that I'm very interested in, since no one is yet shouting, this other format that is also part of that research.
So there's 4 pieces, 2 of them are solos and 2 of them are group pieces, and this group is the biggest, but the performers who are in this piece are also in the other group piece, not all of them because it's a little smaller, the other one. And the 2 solos are actually pieces where I deal with language also, and they also deal with history. So I was looking a lot at the sexual liberation movement of the 1960s. In the US, there was very often a link between performance art and kind of protest action, so against the Vietnam War, but also against the stock market and money made with stock exchange, or so like kind of nudity used as an action to protest, also often in public space. So that piece is actually a, let's say, participatory structure where the audience is invited to be in a space together with me, talking about these things, but then I also perform them, and I perform them together with the audience, and we do actually this orgy structure. I do it with the audience, so it's a kind of, let's say, more experimental form in relation to audience participation, and that's very interesting, and sometimes also tense, but yeah, and the other one called 21 Pornographies looks at the history of pornography, so also from Marquis de Sade to the, let's say, in Denmark, I'm Danish, so I have some references from Denmark where the pornographic image was liberated in '67, and there was a whole boom of pornographic films made in the '70s that are both very funny because they're kind of comedies, but they're also problematic, of course, because they're very often made by men from a male gaze perspective, and then also they kind of signify the moment where the naked body, the liberated naked body of the 60s became captured by capitalism, because basically it was the moment also where all of a sudden these things were shown in movie theaters, and people would go and buy their ticket, and you know, the whole commercialization of the naked body started. So the work has a lot of links to that, like looking at this historical development from the 60s till today. And this piece for me also has to do with thinking about the internet and images and how image circulation of naked or not naked, because Facebook today, for instance, they keep on blocking, like every time we post images of these work, we get blocked. So there's also a kind of editing of what kinds, even though in their policies they have like art, nudity should be possible, but it's not, because it's people who just sit and take down everything that looks like something naked. Also pictures from the 60s that are from historical books get taken down. So there's a kind of, let's say, general censorship going on that I think is very dangerous. I think I think we have to be like, there's an overflow for sure of images, but then there is also a censorship and a controlling of what types of images are then actually visible, which I think is something we should be thinking about.
And there's also one more format which is even more extended, which has a
permeable stage.
Permeable stage, yeah.
Yeah, so that's in a way the fifth project in the series. It's a kind of conference format where I have invited other artists and theorists and thinkers to come together to question these issues publicly, but also with an audience in a kind of discursive form. And it involves, has involved other artists like Anne Uren and Annie Dorsen, people who have worked on these questions in their practices too.
Caroline Schneemann.
Caroline Schneemann also, yes, very important. And several theorists who have worked around these topics.
And I read that there were 10 hours, at least the first one. I don't know if you did.
Yes, that's so it's a very durational form. So it starts at 9 in the morning and finishes at 7 in the evening. And the idea is also to kind of inhabit a space to get. So we invite the audience to stay with us for 10 hours. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes. So it's also something about getting out of the usual economy of a show that you come to see. That in a way is, let's say, it's like, because my work has a lot to do thinking about consumerism, consumption, how do we consume images, but we of course also consume shows. So, and that's something that cannot be resolved. But I think by doing different proposals, and this one is one of the more resistant, extended ones, there's a chance to spend a different kind of time together with an audience and invest in let's say, thinking about these things together also. Because for me, it's also a question of creating a public discussion. And actually, since these works were created, the public discussion has kind of happened because the Me Too movement has had its high rise. And actually, right in the end, like I had already finished this work and the last one in the series, when there was this, big explosion of hashtag #MeToo discussions. So now I'm also, in a way, thinking that like right now it's going away again, but the problems haven't been resolved. So I think there's a matter of like how to think more structurally about these questions. So like how do we transform institutions? How do we transform power structures in society? Like it's not just how do we attack certain people who do wrong things, but it's also how do we think about the structures that are actually behind those things. So sometimes, yeah, I'm still thinking about that, like what needs to actually happen on a more, let's say, activist level.
We don't have so much time, so it's your chance now. I just want to say that the website is your website is very informative. There's a lot of interviews and things you can read, which is great. But now you have a chance to ask for something, your own question.
Or not.
Hello, thank you very much for your, I guess, sincere words of honesty. I have a question. You did mention Charles Ray. You did mention Chapman Brothers. You did mention Caroline Schneemann. There is a huge difference how these artists operated and how successful they were. When I think about Caroly Schneemann, I think her end was very sad in a way. She passed away. Tomorrow would be her 80th birthday. My question is, in your work, you really push for like optimistic, sincere innocence. Mm-hmm. Now, do you really believe that the art world itself, I'm not talking about the world, but mm-hmm. how do you feel the art world? Do you think the art world is going in the sincere, optimistic type of situation, or how do you feel about the art world? How it operates?
I don't know, but I know that I think optimism and utopias are necessary to imagine the world otherwise, and I think the art world also needs the same thing. And then I think it's also important to see that this work is one in a series of 4. And for instance, 21 Pornographies is a piece about violence and sexualized torture and war porn and let's say the more negative side of the coin. So yeah, now you only see this one, so that's obviously the more optimistic side of things. But that's where I think in a way, and with Caroly Schneemann as well, because I have met her and discussed with her a lot about her work, where a part of it has to do with thinking about violence, but there's also a part of it that has to do with thinking about joy and a kind of resistance through a bodily freedom. And I think this is still something that I consider a real potential to invest in, and something that I think we don't have enough of, neither in life nor in the art world. So in that sense, yeah, I think it's for me, it's not about closing the eyes and just hoping for the best, but it's actually about trying to actively produce a different kind of togetherness that obviously out in the real world would be difficult to realize or to maintain. But yeah, it has to be seen in context with the other works and the other problematics that the series brings out. So. Let's finish. Yeah.
Very beautiful question for the end also. So maybe, unless someone must ask a question, then I'm satisfied.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.